Well, you know, a lot of people say that whatever you need to know, it's just right there in the Bible. So if you need to know how to do anything, you just flip open the Bible and it'll tell you right there. And I think, well, it would be really nice if it was that easy. I think sometimes people who tell you that torture the Bible into telling it what they want it to say. But I just wondered, I was going to try just this 1 week to see if I could make that work. So I thought, let's take a look at Jesus healing this son of the widow of Nain and see if it could serve as a sort of a DIY guide to healing people. And if it works, then this is going to be great because we can just go out healing everybody, and this will be good for all of us. So I think the first thing we need to do before we move forward with the healing and learning how to do the healing, we need to understand the context, because context is everything. What works in one context may not work in another context. In other words, what works in December in Ellicottville might not work real well in August in West Texas. And what works with one group of people may not work so well with another group of people. So context is everything. So let's first understand the place in Jesus' life of this story of the healing of the widow of Nain's son. Jesus has just called his disciples, okay? So he's still pretty early in his ministry at this point. He's called his disciples. He's spoken on a plain, which is sort of Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount. We get the same stuff in there as we get in the Sermon on the Mount. He's given the Beatitudes. He's told the people all about the Beatitudes. He's told them to love their enemies. He's told them to worry about the speck in their eye, or the log in their eye, before worrying about the speck in somebody else's eye. Last week we talked about him healing the centurion's servant, and now we have him approaching this funeral procession. So I think step one in our DIY guide to healing, step one is pay attention. We have to be paying attention. Jesus is walking along with a big crowd. Now, let's face it, the crowd was following him. He was the reason that there was a big crowd. I don't know about you, but if I've got a big crowd following me around everywhere I go, I'm going to want to interact and be worried about what the crowd was doing, right? They're there worshiping me. We would all kind of like to have that happen a little bit. So I'd be a little bit wrapped up in these people that are following me around. Jesus doesn't do that. He pays attention and he notices what's going on around him. He sees this funeral procession and he sees the mother of this deceased man. He's not worried about the deceased man, which is interesting. We'll talk about that later, but he sees the mother. He notices her, which makes me question, do we in the church notice people? We come in here on Saturday or on Sunday. Do we really notice when people are in pain? When we look into somebody's face, we see them coming and going. Does it register when we see somebody who is in rough shape? Does it register when we see tears, or are we too caught up in what we're doing? Are we too caught up in coming to just feel good about the fact that we've been here and listen to great music and be lifted up and walk out feeling better? Do we notice? Do we notice if somebody is normally here and it's been a few weeks and they haven't been here? If we're going to minister to people, if we're going to heal people, if we're going to care about healing people, we have to notice. We have to pay attention. So step one in our DIY guide to healing, pay attention. Step two, we have to care. If we can if we're paying attention enough to notice that somebody is hurting, that somebody is having a rough week, that somebody is crying, if we pay attention and notice that, can we bring ourselves to care? How easy would it have been in this story for Jesus to just keep on walking? They didn't know who he was. He could have just walked right past and they wouldn't have noticed. Do you think that mother was worried about crowds walking the other direction? She was focused on her loss, on her son, on what her life was now going to be like. Nobody expected Jesus to raise up everybody from the dead that he walked past, everybody who had died. Nobody expected him to heal everybody. I mean, he just got done healing that centurion's servant, right? I mean, he's kind of filled his quota for a little while, probably. But he saw this woman, and he cared. That's a pretty simple question for us. Do we care? Are we so tied up in being a church and being happy, clappy, go lucky and wanting all this great stuff to happen that we don't care about people that are suffering in our midst? Do we get so tied up in who gets to make decisions about this or that, and why those people don't always do the exact things that we want them to do? Do we get so wrapped up in what the LCMS happens to be doing this week? Are we so worried about what all the rules are and what all the doctrines are that we forget to care about real people? Do we worry about all that other extraneous stuff so much that we don't have any time left to make a difference in people's lives? Because let me tell you this, all that other stuff is much easier. If you just want to go to the board of deacons and complain to them about some decision that they've made, or you want to go to the church council and complain to them about some decision they've made, or rant and rave about the LCMS and whatever the latest stupid thing that they've done is, if you just want to talk about whatever doctrine somebody didn't follow exactly right, that's easy. It's easy to do. It's all about you. All you're doing is focusing on yourself anyhow. But it's easy. And then you can walk away and somebody else has to do something because you've been the squeaky wheel. You know what's not easy? Caring. That's not easy because that takes a great investment on your part. When you decide that you've seen somebody who is hurting and you've decided to care, you have now stepped into a world of hurt. And it's not easy. And it's no longer about you. And it's no longer okay for you just to be selfish. You're going to have to do something. You're going to have to do some stuff that you would rather not do. Can we work up enough, whatever it is that we have to work up, to care? Can we get out of our own way and stop worrying about ourselves for just long enough to care? Step 3. Step 3, we have to be willing not just to care, but we have to be willing to feel. If we've noticed that someone is hurting and we've gotten outside of our own selves for long enough to care, we have to be willing to feel. Our lesson this evening says Jesus had compassion on her. He saw the mother and he had compassion on her. His heart went out to her. He felt for her. He had empathy. I don't know if you realize this or not, but there's a reason why Jesus' empathy is focused on this mother and not on the son. The son was going to be okay. The son probably wasn't all that happy with Jesus for raising him from the dead, to be perfectly honest with you. But his mother would have been in a world of hurt because her only son was gone and she was already a widow. At that place, at that time, women just didn't go down and get a job. It didn't happen. Women were basically property. Women were about like cattle, except that cattle you could get food and milk from. So maybe women were just a little bit lower than that. Women weren't allowed to own stuff. Women weren't allowed to work. The only way that woman would have been able to take care of herself if her son is dead is that she was going to have to beg. She was going to have to beg, or she was going to have to become a prostitute. Those were her two options. That's all that was left for her, and Jesus saw that, and he had empathy for her. His heart went out to her, and he did not want that future for her. So he put himself in her shoes for just a moment, and he felt her pain. Again, we call that empathy. Before we can help somebody heal, we have to be willing to hurt ourselves. We have to be willing to share in their pain and suffering. If we're not willing to do that, we're not going to be able to heal. If Jesus' heart didn't go out to that woman, if he didn't have empathy for her, he could not have healed her. The fourth and last step in healing is just to understand that healing can happen. In fact, we got a great lesson in how it works in our lesson today. We simply find somebody who's dead, we walk up to them, and we say, "Young man, get up and walk." Right? Wrong. It doesn't work that way. We can't do that the way that Jesus did. So lesson 4, or step 4, is that healing can happen if the other things are in place. It may not be supernatural and immediate, but healing can happen. And it happens if we have paid attention and we have cared and we have put ourselves into that person's shoes for just a moment, and we are willing to walk alongside of them for a while. If we are willing to be with them, if we are willing to stand by them day in and day out for a while, if we're willing to listen and care and hold and love them, if we pay attention and we care and we listen, healing can happen. And if we're not willing to do those things, if we're not willing to pay attention, we're not willing to care, we're not willing to have empathy, what's the point of the rest of all this stuff? If we're not willing to do that stuff, nothing good is going to come. There's not going to be healing. We've said it already over and over today. We're broken. We're all broken. Some of us in small ways, some of us in profound ways, but if we are not willing to do those things for each other, there's no reason for us to be here. If we're not willing to put ourselves out for our neighbors, why bother to show up to worship a God who has told us that the way that we show our love for him is by showing our love for our neighbors, by showing our love for each other? If we can't be bothered to pay attention and care and have empathy and help others to heal, we're foolish for thinking God is happy that we're here. But the great news for us today, the great news for us is that if we are willing to do those things, if we are willing to treat other people in this way, our church will become a place of healing. And people will know that. This place will become a place where broken people can come in and whole people can walk out. And then being here makes all the difference in the world. And God will be praised. And He will be honored. And the nice thing is, when the day comes that we're the one that's really profoundly broken and we're the one that is crying and having a hard time, we will walk into a community of people that are used to dealing with people that are hurting. And we will find a group of people who pay attention. A group of people who care. A group of people who have been there and understand how we're feeling and are willing to walk through that trouble with us, who are willing to embrace us, who are willing to walk alongside of us until we get through that troubled time. Man, if we can get there, if we can just get there, that will be a glorious, glorious thing. Amen.